I also want to remind everybody that we have a upcoming live conference coming up in October. We're going to be having those October 14th through 15th. That's going to be in Orlando, Florida, right near our company headquarters, and also right across the street from Universal Studios. So that's really exciting. This is going to be a combined professional development webinar, and it's also going to contain some training for Accudemia, our most popular academic center software. So whether you are a current client or not, there's going to be something for you to get out of this event. I will post a link in the chat just as soon as I hand things over to Nisha with more information about how you can register and join us in October. And we are going to have some really great speakers. We are finalizing the breakout session schedule right now. And for those of you who aren't aware, we also have 2 great keynote speakers. That's going to be Michael Frizzell and Corey Hammond. All right, so now I want to go ahead and introduce you to this month's speaker. Hold on one second here. Let me grab her bio. I just had that. All right. Nisha Abraham has over 15 years of combined industry research and higher education experience. She worked as the assistant director of the Sanger Learning Center at the University of Texas at Austin, and since 2021 has been the senior learning development specialist at Engageli. She specializes in instructional design, training, and facilitation, and has served as an adjunct faculty member at South University. She received her BS in cell and molecular biology from the University of Texas at Austin in 2007, her MS in biology from Texas A&M in 2012, and an MA in STEM education from the University of Texas at Austin in 2019. We are so excited to be hosting her for this session, and I do want to remind everybody that the products that that Engineerica makes can be used in tandem with a lot of the strategies she's going to be discussing today. If you are interested in a trial of that, let me know. But otherwise, Nisha, the floor is yours, and you are now the presenter.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Rachel. And hi, everyone. As Rachel mentioned, my name is Nisha Abraham. My pronouns are she and her. I am so excited to talk to you a little bit about some strategies that we had used at the Sanger Learning Center for assessing the effectiveness of learning support initiatives and programs. Specifically, I'm going to talk about SI, supplemental instruction, for those of you who are familiar with that program, but I think a lot of these can be translatable to other programs. So I'm very excited to speak with you all today, and thank you for being here. So as Rachel mentioned, some former roles, I was assistant director. Before that, I was the course support and instruction lead, which meant that I oversaw all of the different types of course support programs. So we had supplemental instruction, but we also had a program called Plus, which was for actually higher level courses. And then I also managed part of the SI program, mainly the STEM side, and that was at UT Austin at the Sanger Learning Center. So just a little bit of the background of kind of where I was when we were doing a lot of this research. So I do want to take a quick moment because I'd love to get a little bit, unfortunately, I can't see anyone. I can't see who's in the room. So I just wanted to get a quick sense of who's in the room. And so Rachel, I think you'll be able to run this poll for me very quickly. And I just want to get a sense of who's here, who's interested in what I have to present today. So, yeah, if you wouldn't mind sharing your role at your organization.
Yep, I just launched that poll, so attendees feel free to do that. I did make it selectable if they have more than one role, so because I know that can happen for sure.
Okay, amazing. So it looks like we're majority Learning Center staff. We have some folks who are also maybe potentially also doing instruction. So you've got some faculty folks, you've got some higher education admins like deans, these directors. So I am and some instructional learning designers, very excited to see those folks here as well. Looks like it's kind of evened out there. Okay, so majority of our folks here are Learning Center staff. So I'm very excited to really be talking with you folks. I assume you're here because you're really interested in the assessment piece and kind of how you can maybe be assessing your Learning Center programs. And if you're welcome to, if you want to, in the chat or in the, yeah, probably in the chat, if you want to add what program that you work for or what program you're managing, just so I can get a little bit more of a sense of, is it tutoring, is it SI, is it like learning coaching, academic coaching? I'm curious what different programs you all assess. You're welcome to put that in the chat and we can kind of get a sense of that. But let me go ahead and start by talking a little bit about what we are going to do today throughout the rest of the presentation. So some of you may be familiar with SI, but I didn't want to make any assumptions. So I want to make sure that I talk a little bit about the Supplemental Instruction Program or SI program, and really why it is a little bit difficult to assess. What components of the program make it sometimes a little bit hard to understand what kind of impacts your program, that kind of program, is having. I want to talk about some real world examples. So some program assessments, but also some research that I conducted for the program and how we were able to show some of the really positive impacts that we had through the SI program. And I'll talk a little bit about the data sources that we employed. And we certainly did use, you know, of course, we used SI program attendance, which is probably something that you have a little bit more accessible to you, but we also, as Rachel mentioned, you may be able to use different types of data, different sources of data to be able to make kind of larger you know, arguments for the programs that you're running. And then hopefully we'll have some time at the end for you to also contribute kind of what are the things that you want to evaluate in your program, what data sources are accessible to you, and how you may be able to put that together. And as Rachel mentioned, if you want to add questions to the Q&A, please feel free to do that. But also I hope you all are answering each other's questions. There's a huge plethora of expertise here in the room. So if you see a question and you think you can help answer, please feel free to do so. So as I mentioned, Supplemental Instruction Program, it's an internationally recognized support program, and it has, oops, sorry about that. It's an academic support program that really employs student support, so peer-to-peer student support, and it usually, most programs that I've come across or that the International Center run they usually run 2 identical sessions a week, and that really helps really collect as many students, you know, kind of promote it and have as many students come to those sessions as possible. But it really is a very different kind of model in the sense that it's getting students to do peer-to-peer work with difficult content, but also bringing in those effective study strategies. So things like retrieval practice, things like space practice. So some of the things that students maybe didn't get a lot of instruction, you know, in high school, they're getting some of those study skills from the program as well. So at UT Austin, at Sanger Learning Center, the SI program is run by a collaboration between program coordinators at SLC and with the departments and the specific faculty members of the courses that they support. So that's kind of how SI is run, at least at UT Austin, and that might be different at your institution, but that's kind of the general the way that SI is run. So some of the components, as I mentioned earlier, it is student facilitated. So unlike maybe some other tutoring programs or certain other types of, for example, recitation sessions or discussion sections, which are usually more graduate student focused or might be a little bit higher level of expertise, these are students who have recently taken the course and have been successful at that and then are trained to be able to facilitate these SI sessions. It's also, rather than targeting students, individual students, it's really trying to target historically difficult gateway classes. So I'm sure many of you are familiar, the Learning Center folks, you've got that roster of classes that have really high Q drops, or, you know, they have Fs and Ds. The rates of students failing those classes is really high, and so we associate SI, or we complement the course with SI sessions, so that rather than targeting students, individual students, which can feel really remedial, we really focus on the particular class and offer sessions to anybody who's in the class, really. As I mentioned, yeah, so that's the third point. We really offer it to any student. It's not for folks who are at risk. It's really for any student. We are hoping students who are at risk are going to show up, but it's not particularly targeted at any particular student. Another thing about it, in comparison to something like tutoring or even something like academic coaching, is that it's regularly scheduled sessions. So rather than the student having to sort of, make a scheduled appointment or kind of take the onus on themselves. The sessions are always happening at the same time every week, and students can kind of show up when they need to or when they want to. And so you're probably kind of seeing where I'm going with these things. And then the last point, as I mentioned, is it is both content and skills integrated. So it's not just focused on content or just focused on skills. It's really marrying both of them in sessions. So a big part of training your facilitators or your student facilitators is making sure that have a lesson plan that's not only talking about the content, but teaching students how to process that content in a way that is effective during the session, but that they can walk away from those sessions with actual study skills that they can take away and use in the rest of their study for that class, but hopefully on to other future classes as well. So that's kind of the components of the SI session. So as you're probably imagining, it can be a little bit of a difficult program to assess, but let me talk a little bit about, as I mentioned, it's an internationally recognized program. So there is an actual international center of SI. The graph on the left here is it's about 2014 to 2019. So the last 5 years, they collect across the world actually. So their SI has programs in Australia, Sweden, all different universities across the world. It's a very effective program. And so they collect this data and publish it. They usually do a 10-year span, but I was able to reach out and they were kind enough to send me the last 5 years of data that they have collected. And this is showing, again, what we call QDF rates or DFW rates, which is, getting a D, an F, or a withdraw from a course. And this is showing, the orange bar is showing students who attend either 1 to 4 times. The yellow bar is showing from 5 to 9 times, and then the green bar is your 10 plus, so they go 10 times. Again, you're thinking about maybe like a 14, 15 week semester. And so you can really see the reduction in that QDF rate as the more times a student goes. And then they do have the blue and the red that are just in general showing SI groups. So they also do an assessment where they consider the SI group as someone who's either gone 2 or more times, and the non-SI group is someone who's gone 0 to 1 time. So they do a couple of different types of assessments, but you'll notice that they're really centered around retention. So making sure that students don't completely fail out of the class or withdraw from the class. And so for many years, that's really the assessment that we followed. We followed just, looking at the QDFW rates. Q drop for us at UT was just Q dropping the course, which means there was no impact to the student grade, but it was still obviously something where the student didn't successfully make it through the course. So we did a sort of similar kind of assessment. This is from 2017, 2018 times. So we always saw a reduction in the QDFW rates, which is great. Nothing bad here, nothing wrong with this. But I think that we also were just concerned because there are a lot of challenges in assessing SI where we were obviously not having a negative impact. We were certainly, students who are attending SI regularly were not dropping out of the course or failing the course as high rates as those who didn't attend. But we wanted to see, were they having any other types of impacts? We really wanted to understand a little bit more about the SI program. So some of the challenges we found was, again, the voluntary nature. So there's a reason why it's voluntary, because again, we don't want to necessarily target students, because at least in our experience, we found that when students know that they're being targeted for a program, they might be even more reticent to actually utilize the program. So, SI isn't really built that way. It's built to really allow students to come and go, to come when they want. But there is also constantly this argument, at least those who run SI programs, is that, it's either students who are already going to be successful, people who understand the university system, people who maybe had someone advising them, they know that these sessions are going to be helpful for them, so they go, but they would have already been successful because they have been prepped in previous, in high school and things like that. And so there's some sort of argument sometimes that, those people will be successful anyway, so SI is not really having an impact. And so how do we more accurately compare students? So can we find a way to sort of group students based on their background, their preparation, kind of how they came in? Are they at risk? And can we compare the groups a little bit more accurately to see how SI is actually impacting those groups? And so that was something that we were really curious about. Another thing that's really tough is SI tends to be for freshman classes, right? So we really target the classes that, you know, we know students have a hard time with when they come in from high school, but they tend not to really have SI for, at least at UT Austin, we really have them for freshman classes, don't really have them for sophomore or senior, you know, any higher levels. And so we were curious, you know, is what SI is really teaching, these sort of study skills, is it really teaching long-term skills? Are people able to take that and translate that into future success in, you know, future semesters? And, you know, selfishly, we did often find, and for a particular program that we were running in SI in engineering, there were certain programs that we were seeing that's not really a very high impact. We were seeing a reduction in QDF rates, but we weren't really seeing an increase in course GPAs or you know, anything like that, grade outcomes. And so we were a little surprised by that. And so we thought, you know, maybe it's not having the impact because it's just one semester. So that was kind of tough. We wanted to understand a little bit more about that. Another thing is, again, for those of you who are Learning Center staff, you might have redundancies in the supports that you're offering, which is really important. It is actually super important, and this is, again, not an argument for not having that. We want to have multiple types of support programs for, you know, different courses or for different students who have a preference for that. For example, again, we had Chemistry 101 was offered with SI, but it was also we had appointment tutoring, which was our one-on-one tutoring. And again, that's for a really important reason, because you might need different resources for different times, for different types of students. However, it does make it difficult, right? How can you sort of you can't really make causation claims. You can't say SI is definitely the reason that these students are doing better. We can maybe make some correlations here, but we can't make causation claims. So again, we were kind of curious about if there are other supports that are available to students. How are they choosing those resources? How do they make the choice to go to SI or to go to a TA discussion section, or to maybe create their own peer study groups? We knew that they were doing that on their own as well. So we were really curious about kind of their behavior around academic support. And then the last thing, many of you will know this. This is probably one of the most common things that, you know, when I talk to other Learning Center staff, we all probably are aware that students don't necessarily love group work as a whole, right? They're making a huge sweeping kind of statement here. But for the most part, most students are, they're a little reticent to do group work. I think, you know, you have to be a little bit vulnerable. You have to share what you know and what you don't know. I think all have had that experience working in a group, maybe on a group project, didn't go so well, right? So, you know, we all were aware that sometimes students perceived the peer-to-peer collaborative work in SI as, oh, this is a waste of my time. I just want to have one-on-one help. I want to get a direct answer to my question. I don't necessarily want to go through this activity. And so we were really curious about the group work, but also we were trying to understand, did students have any sort of perceptions about the fact that their SI leader was a student as well, you know, someone who is not necessarily a graduate student or a, you know, a professor or faculty member, but was someone just like them, a year ahead of them, a year or two ahead of them, say, who had completed the course successfully. So we were really curious about those types of things. And so some of the approach that we took is like I said, we wanted to do some comparisons first. Rather than looking just at QDFW rates, we wanted to look a little bit at their course GPAs. So looking at, you know, were there comparisons that we could actually make with their course GPAs? But also because we had, you know, a really distinct group of students, we wanted to accurately compare students in the SI and the non-SI groups. So a way to potentially control for that using demographic data. We also, like I said, wanted to understand, are there any long-term effects? If there are any, we want to try to understand what those were. And again, assess students' perception of group work and whether that was impacting their learning, again, hopefully in a positive way. But these are the kinds of questions that we really had. So I'm going to jump into the first sort of program assessment. So this was when I first came into SI. As I mentioned, we were doing mainly QDFW rates. We would look into the data, and we weren't always seeing, you know, the positive impacts that we were looking for. And so let me give you an example of that. So our research question really here for the first time we really ran this data is we, again, wanted to understand if we controlled for certain demographic information, could we match students so that we could see that the same types of students who attended SI were, you know, if you compare the groups who attended SI and who did not attend SI, are we actually able to see some impact directly, as directly as possible that SI is having on end of semester course grades. So the kind of data that we collected, of course, we did our SI attendance data. We had our students use a new system. So when I came in, we worked with the university to develop a internal system where we collected it based on student ID. So that's really the central kind of component that we were matching everything based on, student ID. We do have a university database where we're able to grab some of the demographic data about students. So things like gender, ethnicity, parents' income level, and SAT scores. Now, I do want to point out, I do know SAT scores are not exactly the best metric here. Again, we did this back in 2017 when we really didn't have any other data on students in lieu of preparation. It was very difficult to kind of assess how well are students prepared, or kind of what level are they coming in at from high school. And so that was really our best kind of proxy that we were able to use, but I just want to acknowledge it's certainly not the best source of data for that, but we were using all of this in combination together. And then of course we did take their end of semester course grade data for each of the courses that we have SI for. And so the analysis that we did was we used R to do a little bit more of an apples to apples comparison. So we did a matching where, again, we matched these students based on demographics and then split them into SI versus non-SI groups. And then we were able to compare their average course GPAs for the groups who went to SI and those who did not. So just to give you a sense of what this looks, so this is the box plot that we were able to show. So so after doing the matching, after doing the kind of comparing apples to apples and using the demographic information, we were able to see that students who did not attend SI had a 2.68 end of course GPA. And this is for our Eco 304K class, which is our intro. It's, I believe it's intro to macroeconomics. And so students who did not attend SI had an average of a 2.68 versus our SI students had a 3.02. So a difference of 0.383 points, which, is not insignificant. It's pretty impressive, and it is statistically significant, of course, but this is really important to be able to show that based on kind of controlling for this demographic data, a little bit more comparing apples to apples, we're able to show that the students who attended SI actually did see a positive impact in their course grades. So next, we wanted to know a little bit more again about the long-term effects. And again, like I said, one of the reasons that we even attempted doing this was we were finding that this particular course, this is an intro to engineering course, and we found that students who were going to SI we were not seeing any super positive impact to their course GPAs. In fact, there were some semesters where we were seeing that it was lower. It was lower than the students who didn't go to SI. And again, we would sometimes write that off as, oh, maybe those students who are already well prepared, they're used to using services, they're really accustomed to using services and reaching out for help when they need it. Those are the ones who are already going to SI, and so we're just not really seeing the students who need the help. They're just, they're either not aware or, they're not used to reaching out for that sort of service. But, we were kind of frustrated by that. I'm sure many of you have experienced that before, where you're running a really important service and a really important academic program, and you think if students just attended, they would have so much benefit from it. And then you're sort of not seeing that in the data. So we were really curious, maybe we weren't assessing long enough. Maybe we were just looking at one semester and it wasn't really showing us the long-term kind of effects of the program. And so what our research question was, is there any correlation between SI attendance in so EE 302 is the intro class. And then the next semester, if you make it through that class, you would go into EE 411, which is the next step, the subsequent course. And so in general, we're just trying to understand, is there a relationship between SI attendance and future semester grade point averages? Is this having maybe long-term effects that we're not looking at? And so the data that we collected, again, of course, SI session attendance based on their student ID. We collected their course grades and their semester grades, as well as pre-semester and post-semester cumulative GPAs. And then again, we did use SAT scores at the time. We didn't have anything sort of better to use, but that was kind of what we used to understand, where they're coming in at that time. And so we had course grades for both EE 302 and EE 411. And so what we did was we compared median course GPAs for SI and non-SI groups, and then we also tracked them into that subsequent course. So we took that same student ID and looked at, what were their semester grades after or when they had gone through the second course. And so what we found, this was, of course we were elated to see this. So in the first semester, in the freshman year, when you're looking at their data, the no SI groups had an 8% higher mean SAT score. So again, it sort of confirmed our idea here that some of these students maybe had a little bit better preparation. So they weren't going to SI because they felt like they didn't need it. They were, happy to not go. And they had about a 4% higher predicted GPA. So, through the predictive analytics that we had about them, it was claimed to be that they would do better than their SI group. However, what we saw was the SI group outperformed the non-SI group in the subsequent course, even though the SI group's course grade for the first course was lower. So even though we weren't seeing the impact in that first semester, when you followed the SI students into the next semester, we were seeing a higher, they were outperforming the non-SI group. And so some of what we were hoping, or what we're, again, inferring here, is that they are learning some skill that takes time to actually have impact, and it is something that they maybe take into their future courses and are able to utilize and use for those higher level courses, which of course, as we know, are even more difficult than your freshman level courses. And so this is what we were seeing in terms of long-term impact, and we were, of course, really excited to see this. The third research study that we did, so this is, again, when I kind of came into SI, we were really trying to understand behaviors of students, maybe what was happening if there were lots of different types of support systems. So at UT Austin, for example, so the Sanger Learning Center certainly had things like one-on-one tutoring, but the engineering school also provided a lot of support. So things like TA discussion sections, things like extra study sessions. So there was a lot of redundancy, and again, not for any, not in a negative way, it's all really important to services. But again, we just were so curious, what is it that is drawing students into certain services, or maybe repelling them from other services? So some of the research questions that we wanted to look at for this study was, how do students' initial awareness? So, initially our question was, are students even aware of SI? We certainly, at least at UT Austin, we have, I think it's even bigger than it is than when I was there, but we started with a population of 50,000 students, and so sometimes these messages can get lost of all of the different services that are available, how often students are receiving that sort of marketing and promotion, and how often they're thinking, oh, I need help, where do I go? Making that connection for them can be kind of difficult. So we wanted to first understand, what are they aware of? Are they even aware of all the services that exist? And then once they hopefully know what's out there, how are they making the decisions on what to choose to, which supports they want to use? And so, and then of course, my big question is always, once they understand the SI model, once they understand that it's peer-led, that it's collaborative, is that influencing either their intention to attend SI sessions, influencing them to not? And we were just really curious about, what it was about the SI program and how students were making those choices. So again, we did the SI session attendance, which again, we had to do that. So any of your programs, you'd probably want to be collecting attendance and the number of attendances. We did take their course grades and semester course grades and semester grades overall, so their overall semester grades. And then same thing, we did their SAT scores, because again, we did not really have a better sort of metric there for preparation, but happy to talk more about what we did in future research, but that was kind of our proxy for preparation. And then during this research study, we really wanted to get into the qualitative, because these are really qualitative questions, right? How are we how are students perceiving something? What is their awareness of resources? So essentially we did, and we always did pre and post surveys. The program has always done pre-surveys and post surveys at the end of the semester. And so but this time we included some more questions really around, what is their awareness of resources, and do they have an intention to use certain services? And then for the post survey, for those who had attended SI, what did they perceive as the benefits? What did they think they got out of it? And so the analysis that we did was we, for the quantitative part, we did the same thing that we had done in the past, really comparing average course GPAs for SI versus non-SI groups. But here, what we did was we used what we call score ranges, SAT score ranges. So we organized the SAT sort of into buckets, if you will, and we compared students with the same SAT scores in those buckets to those who went to SI versus non-SI. And so trying again to really compare a little bit more apples to apples. And then in terms of the qualitative, we were trying to understand, we just did essentially open coding to determine sort of general themes that we were seeing from the pre-survey and from you know, the post-survey, kind of what they felt the perceived benefits were. So this was probably one of my favorite studies we did, and really the reason I'll tell you. So again, these were the buckets that we had. So we had folks who were in the 1,000 to 1,120 SAT score range, all the way to the 1,520 to 1,600. So these are the buckets, and so the SI group is in blue and the non-SI group is in red. And so the thing that I really found so remarkable here, you can see that the sort of middle range of folks, we're still seeing, you know, increases. I think the only one that didn't have an increase was sort of the second to last group. It was a slight difference there. But what I want to point out is the group who has the lowest SAT scores had the biggest difference in their, you know, mean GPA for the semester. And that's really impactful. You know, if you have a student who, again, for those of you who support students who are in STEM specifically, if you have a student who's coming in with a low SAT score, again, it's not a perfect metric by any means, but again, as a proxy, you know, those are the students that we would find extremely at risk for not making it through the program, not making it through a STEM program. And when you're comparing those students, the students who did go to SI, who again are in blue, that's quite a big distinction. You know, they were able to make it through that course. And again, knowing that there are long-term impacts, we're hoping that those students get something out of it and keep going and keep making it through the program and getting better and better. So as I said, students who attended SI sessions here really received a higher average end of semester course GPA. When we compared, I think the only one that was slightly lower was the 1390 to 1510 group. The other thing that like people sometimes do point out is that highest end, there is a difference there as well. And again, what we find is, what I love about this message too is that positively impacts everyone generally, right? So, you know, sometimes we have these arguments, again, students who are well prepared or they don't need the service or they think they'll be fine without it, even they are seeing positive impact. So for those of you who are familiar, for example, with universal design for learning, you know, the underlying principle of that is that it's a design principle that will help students who need it, but it also helps everyone. And so I always really loved that message when I present this data here. I think about certainly helping students who are at risk, or maybe, you know, we're at risk of not making it, but it also helps pretty much everyone else. So there's almost no downside here. So that's kind of one of my favorite aspects to this remarkable study. Now, talking about a little bit more about the qualitative side here. So like I mentioned, we did ask them to, and I know this is a quantitative graph of this, so again, it is a little bit more of a quantitative of the qualitative, but again, the thing that we were really interested in, the two aspects were sort of what was the expertise that was offered in these different types of programs? Like, are students able to recognize, like, oh, this one is an office hour with a TA, you know, someone who has a high level of expertise, a TA or professor. And also we wanted to understand, we thought the other difference that we often notice with these programs is the student ratio, right? So a one-on-one tutoring session, of course, is a tutor and a student. You're really getting that one-on-one attention versus something like SI, where there's one leader and there could be, you know, 20 to 50, depending on, you know, the time of the year, it could be 20 to 50 students there. And what we found is we found that students are generally pretty aware of the resources. And again, we were happy to know that because we were concerned. There's just so many different types of resources. We were often always worried, are students sure that they know what all the choices are out there? And they do. We see that they, you know, in general, they're pretty aware of the resources that exist. But there was quite a significant decrease in their intent to use, so their plan to use certain resources. So we saw that things like one-on-one tutoring didn't see a high level of interest in that. And then again, we saw a pretty significant reduction in SI as well. So what we found was these two services are really peer-led, right? At least at the Sanger Learning Center, the majority of the tutors are also students, as is with supplemental instruction. And in comparison to that, the peer study groups, so the peer study groups, we found what was interesting about, I mean, a lot of people said they plan to use that. And what we thought was, oh, that's a little bit more informal. There's not, you know, that's something that they create on their own, and they're happy to do that on their own. But when they do want help, when they do reach out for assistance for a resource, they want somebody with a high level expertise. So we saw that there was quite a high intent to use office hours with someone like a TA or professor, and that was kind of what we saw in this. So again, it gave us a little bit more kind of insight into what is their awareness of the resources that exist, and maybe a little bit about their behaviors, why they choose to use the resources that they do. And then the last study that I wanted to talk about, the fourth one, is, again, because we were so, you know, it was very difficult to assess the voluntary nature of SI, kind of, again, people who come and go, people who maybe need to go more regularly. As you saw in the beginning of the presentation, the International SI program is looking now, not only looking at what they call SI and no SI, which is very black and white kind of, you know, gradients there. They're looking at a little bit more of a spectrum. So they're looking at folks who are going 1 to 4 times, 5 to 9 times, 10 and on. Because you are actually seeing some pretty significant difference in those groups. And so we thought about how we could potentially incentivize students to go to something that is a voluntary program, right? Kind of difficult to do. And so we did find a research study where another group had done something similar, where they had created a registration system for their SI sessions, and they asked students at the beginning of the semester to register for these courses, register for these SI sessions. So they had multiple sessions available, students could register, but with that registration came the understanding that you would go to that same session every week, and it would be the same students, it would be the same SI leader every time. And so you sort of made an agreement with us at the program and the faculty member, and we would track that over the course of the semester. Now, I'll be honest. So as I mentioned, the research question was really around if we had students register for the same SI session, and we required their attendance. The requiring is in parentheses, really, because there was no penalty to not attending. So what would happen is, if a student didn't attend 3 times in a row, we would be doing outreach to that student as soon as they had an absence. But if after 3 absences they just, you know, chose not to attend anymore, we would remove them from that group and open up a space if someone was on a wait list for that. We found that there was little of that. In fact, when we had the registration system, I think something like 5 students stopped showing up of a total of 185 or so. And we were able to add a couple of people to the wait list, and, you know, there was really no kerfuffle, as you will, if you were concerned about that. But essentially, yeah, our question was, if we really incentivize this idea of you're going to keep attending the same session with the same group of other students, so you kind of get to know them over the course of time, you get to know your SI leader really well. How does that affect attendance trends? You know, do you feel any sort of kind of onus to keep going because now you've met the other folks, you kind of know the other folks, you might be more interested in attending? And then, you know, does it impact overall course GPAs? Does it reduce QDF rates? All the same things that we had seen before, but just seeing this sort of on a cohort base. And then, again, as sort of a person, as an educator, I'm so curious about what their perception of that was, because up until then, SI had been totally voluntary, you didn't have to register. And so did the registration kind of repel students, or did it turn students off? Was there any part of it that they found positive about it? You know, so just, again, lots of different interesting questions that we wanted to ask. So the data that we collected was very similar to what we had done in previous studies, so SI session attendance, course grades, and GPAs. However, this time what we did, the faculty member that I worked with, Dr. Nina Talang, who is wonderful if anybody's had a chance to read any of her work, because we were so aware that SAT scores were kind of problematic. It was not really giving us that real metric of preparation, if you will. What Nina did was she did a self-report survey at the beginning of the semester to understand all of these students' programming experience. So this is a programming course. And so she wanted to understand and kind of get a sense of what are students' programming experience prior to taking the course. And we were essentially going to use that as our quote unquote preparation score. We did do end of semester surveys like we had always done, but I actually conducted small group or one-on-one interviews with students. So we scheduled it closer to the end of the semester to essentially interview students about their experience in this cohort-based SI. And so the analysis that we did the same sort of thing that we had done in the past in terms of grouping students, but instead of using SAT scores here, we used the previous programming experience as the way to group students, and then compared the SI and non-SI groups. And then what we did with the interviews was just kind of assessing the emerging themes that we saw from the interview data. So looking at them like clinical interviews and kind of seeing emerging themes that were arising. So again, very exciting stuff here. The students who attended SI sessions, I mean, again, this is really amazing to me because, as we know, students who are going into a programming course who do not have any previous programming experience, that's going to be tough for them, right? And so what we saw was students who had no programming experience, if you group those students together, you split them based on SI versus no SI, we saw a statistically significant improvement in their course GPA. So we saw a 3.83 versus a 3.25, which again, just a really impressive thing for the students who you might be concerned or who are at risk. This is what we did for our end of semester surveys. So we have our sort of normal set of questions that we ask them about their SI experience, but this time we added some other questions sort of about things like sense of community, how they felt about participating in small group activities. Just as a sort of reminder, this happened in fall 2020. So we were in the height of the pandemic. We had converted all of our SI sessions to completely Zoom sessions. So, you can imagine, and for those of you who remember this time, getting students to go to academic support services during the pandemic was a real struggle. It was tough. We were all experiencing a really extreme stress moment. And we were really concerned. We just did not know how students were going to react in terms of attending sessions. Were they going to feel a sense of community across a virtual platform? How were they going to respond to doing small group work or working in, and I don't know how many of you have experienced this, but you put students in a breakout room, either bail or their cameras off. We saw some of that as well. So we just wanted to get a sense again of if the students are really in a cohort that they know each other and they get to know each other over the course of the semester, does it impact any of their experience of working in these small groups, of being in breakout rooms with their peers? How did it impact their experience with having this SI leader? So as you can see, we have some pretty impressive data here. Again, I found participating and contributing in breakout rooms during the SI sessions helpful to my learning. 77.77% said, strongly agree or agree. Of course, they felt their SI leader was knowledgeable. As a result of attending EE 306 SI sessions, I felt more confident about solving problems on my own. So, we were seeing some really impressive data from their responses in the end of semester course survey, despite, again, a completely virtual offering. And I'll also mention that part of the intervention here that we did was we made the theme of our SI program for that semester community building. So a huge component here was working with our student facilitators, with our SI leaders, to do community building activities during their actual SI sessions, to spend time getting to know their students and having students get to know each other. And so I think that really impacted how students felt about, the SI sessions. Some of the emerging themes that we saw, and I wish I could have put a lot more on the slide. I did not want to overwhelm people with all of the data that we saw, but again, I think I shared the the references at the end of the slides, and so all of the interviews and emerging themes come out in the paper that we publish. So I'm happy to direct you there if you'd like to see exactly what students said. But the things that we really saw in terms of the emerging themes were the impact of knowing and having the same peers in the session really positively impacted the students. So they felt, again, because they knew the people that were going to be in their sessions and they got to know them over the course of the semester, they felt a little bit more beholden to showing up, even when they didn't want to, even when they felt like, ugh, I don't really want to go today, or I'm not feeling up for it. They kind of knew each other and felt like, oh, we sort of have this I have a duty to go, essentially. There was a lot of impacts of the SI leader. Again, we work really hard with our SI leaders to provide them a lot of facilitation and training so that they are equipped to run sessions effectively, but also to be human and to talk about their struggles and their failures through their time in different programs. And so that was a really important aspect of it. We did find that when students really started to understand what SI was, how it was maybe a little bit different than their lecture, than their TA discussion sections. Again, they realized the importance of the group work. They realized the importance of the study skills and things like that. We saw some split here, their perceptions of small group work. We did definitely see some students who felt that they would be in groups of really differing levels of preparedness. And sometimes that kind of did not go well. There were students who felt that they got left behind in discussions because other students were not verbalizing or processing as out loud or as well as they needed to. And so we thought a lot about that in going forward and thinking about how we might group students in a particular way. As I mentioned, I was a little concerned. I wasn't sure how students were going to react about the idea of having to register for a session and receive ongoing communications, but again, overwhelmingly students said it was really helpful for them to get reminder emails. It was helpful for them to get this registration and set it up so that they put it on their calendars. They knew they had to attend every week. So overwhelmingly they were quite positive about that. And then translating SI activities, we didn't always see the most impact. A lot of students didn't necessarily verbalize that, oh, they were going to take these type of activities and go use them on their own, but they were overwhelmingly, again, very positive about how it impacted their studying at that time. So for that particular course, they felt it was really super helpful. And then the last thing, again, I'll be very honest, we did find that, so this was for an engineering course, and so the majority of students, are male, are male, and so we had a much smaller group of female students, and depending on the gender, or the gender of the SI leader and the sort of mix of the group, we did see some groups that were, if they were overwhelmingly male and there was a female student, she tended to be a little bit more isolated. So again, we really had to look back at that data and think about how did we want to group students in the future? If we did this again, how could we make this so that we weren't necessarily isolating students because of gender or ethnicity or other factors like that. So those are some of the emerging themes that we saw. And again, like I mentioned, it would be great if you would like to see more of this. Please feel free to access the paper. The paper is free. You should be able to get it from the ASEE website. And again, I'm happy to share that in the chat later on. But I think we are kind of coming towards the point where I want to get a little bit more information from folks, and questions might be coming in. I haven't been looking at the questions, so I apologize.
They have, yep.
I'm sure the good questions have been coming in, but I would love to hear from folks. What metrics are you currently using to evaluate your program, and what innovations would you like to make? So what are the things that maybe keep you up at night, or your things that you really want to ask, research questions that you want to ask that you haven't been able to do yet? I'd love to get a sense from folks. So folks are welcome to add that to the Q&A or to the chat, whatever you'd like to, whichever method you'd like to do. But I'm happy to also take questions at this point.
Yeah, if we want to start with the questions that have been coming in, and we can also include comments. Oh, I just saw a comment. We use assessment related to our college's essential competencies. And then another one. we have
Okay.
SI attached, and attached is in quotes, to the course, and then the sessions are on the student schedules. The volunteer aspect of SI is that the student has chosen to take the course with SI attached.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so you have some courses that have SI and some that don't, and so the student chooses the one with SI, then they essentially choose to go. Okay, got it. Very cool. Okay.
Okay.
Um,
And then I did have a quick question that I think is a little time sensitive. Somebody asked,
sure.
first of all, are you able to make the EOS survey available as an attachment or email it to folks? I did let people know we will be sending the slides out, or I did let this person know. And I'm letting everyone else know now. The slides will be included with the recording. And then
Yep.
if you have a second, could you go back to the EOS survey responses slide and just, are you able to enlarge that so people can see the text there?
Let's see if I can make it a little bit bigger. I apologize. It is very small. We had so many great questions in here. So yes, I apologize. I think this might be the biggest I can make. Oh, there we go. Maybe that might be the biggest. But yes, time sensitive question. Absolutely. I am happy to send the version that we sent out at the time that I was there. I'm happy to send a version of that. So we used Qualtrics. That was the survey instrument that we used, but you could essentially use Google Forms or whatever your assessment is. But these are the questions that we did ask that were particular to this research study. So these were so some of these questions we would always ask in our end of semester. But for example, the second one, which was did the SI sessions increase your sense of community? Because our theme for that semester was really focused on sense of community, we again wanted to kind of understand how did it impact their sense of community there. But yeah, for the most part, we always asked quick questions like the small group work. This time, because it was fall 2020 and it was during a virtual semester, we did ask them about breakout rooms, right? Because we never did breakout rooms. Rooms didn't exist before fall 2020, for those of you who remember. And so we wanted to, again, there were sort of some questions about the virtual aspect of it as well. So we felt like we got some good answers there. But yeah, you're welcome to take screenshots. And again, I'm happy to send these slides so you can get a closer look at these.
Yeah, and we will definitely include a link to them with our recording. Let's move on. If we're able to move on to questions and then get to the other comments that we've gotten in order
Sure.
as they've come in, it's just a little easier that way. So Christy asks, and hi Christy, thanks for joining us, one of our former speakers. Have you used predictive analytics in any way with assessing effectiveness of services? If so, how? If no, how could you imagine using predictive analytics?
Okay, so we have, I mean, so just as a heads up, I'm no longer with the University of Texas at Austin or with Sanger Learning Center. So this was work that I had done in a prior job. So at the time, we really didn't have the tech to do so. We did not have predictive analytics. We did have an assessment coordinator, and we were starting to come up with some research questions about, again, using, like you said, using again, demographic data, if there was a way to use things like previous, like a great example actually is not for my program, but we had a math support person, I should say, who runs our math support at the Sanger Learning Center. And one of the questions that we had was if we were able to get students' last math class, so what was the last course that they took in high school? Was it pre-calc? Was it calc? The different, had they taken algebra? I think for many of you who might be doing math assessment, you're probably aware algebra is such a cornerstone for everything else. And so understanding where they were in sort of their math preparation and using that, again, rather than what we did with previous programming experience, but something similar, right? Maybe not using SAT scores, but so something like that to collect and to create a predictive model. I'll be honest, it was a little bit beyond me in terms of my analytics. I did not have access to something like R where we were able to do sort of a backwards design or using past data to create a model where we were able to see, okay, how close is our prediction to reality, and then to essentially qualify that as our predictive model and then use that going forward. I will tell you that the University of Texas at Austin themselves, at the higher level assessment, they do a lot of predictive analytics on students, again, using a plethora of different demographic data on students. it's sort of a very, very tightly held secret, the weightage of all those things and how they're using it to predict how students are going to do. My understanding is they do a prediction of their 4-year graduation rate and of their first semester GPA. So there are definitely people doing it out there. You know, we have doing it maybe at a little bit of a higher level, but it was definitely something that was like a larger term project that unfortunately I did not get to. But I do think something like that, it does require that you're going out to the students and getting them to either self-report their preparation in, let's say, math, or whatever it is, the program that you're trying to assess. So it's a big undertaking, I'll just say that, but it's certainly something that we were excited to try to do. Hopefully that answers your question.
All right. Thank you. And I actually had a question, and it might be, I know you're no longer working directly in higher ed, or at the Sanger Learning Center, so it might be some audience members might have some ideas too, is how some of these methods could be applied to learning centers that don't necessarily have an SI component and need to assess the value of their services, because I know we have a lot of centers. I do have a lot of Accudemia users who do have SI, and a lot who just don't. So I'm curious to know, like, how some of these methods, in your opinion, and anyone else in the audience, might be applied to non-SI types of support services.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we certainly at Sanger, at least, we had lots of different types of services. So we had an entire tutoring team. So we had things like one-on-one tutoring. So you might have something like that where you have one student tutor and one student user who's kind of interacting with each other. I think the big thing there is, at least the way that we used to think about assessment for that type of program, was a little bit more about, for those of you who are running tutoring programs, that part of it's not that you are doing obviously a lot of content support there. You're really working maybe through practice problems, or the students working through something and you're sort of checking through their work. But a big part of tutoring is still facilitation. It's, you're not necessarily going to give them a direct answer. That's not really the point of tutoring. It's hopefully to help the student self-assess, understand where maybe they went wrong on a problem, or where they're having a struggle with something. And helping them lead them through that process, right, of becoming self-sufficient. So regardless, and this, I think, hopefully most of you would agree that most of our support services are really trying to do that. It's trying to make students be able to take care of themselves and figure out how to do these things with some assistance, right? So something like a tutoring program, what we were really curious, what we started doing were peer observations. So we started out thinking about, we definitely, of course, did observations for staff observations, I will call them. So the program coordinator would of course observe to make sure that everything was kosher, everything was going well. But then we had senior tutors who would do observations as well. And in fact, if there was any positive to come out of a horrible pandemic, is that the ability for peers to jump into a Zoom room and be able to observe their peers was so much easier than what it had been in the past, what had been in person. But so what we did was a lot more of a qualitative method there, even though it was one-on-one tutoring, which we certainly did try to assess whether students were having a positive impact from, whether it was attending more number of tutoring sessions, which I think we generally did see a pretty positive impact. But in this case, we were trying to understand how helpful was it for tutors who were doing less of the explaining. So how much more were they asking, for example, students to explain their thought process? How much more effective was it when the student would answer a problem or work out a problem, and then the tutor would lead them through finding where they maybe made an error and thinking the thought process out of how to find or how to correct for that error that they made. So it was quite a bit more qualitative, actually. So it was all peer observation. It certainly helped tutors become better, and I think all of us can probably attest to this. It's a little bit easier to get feedback from your peer than from your supervisor. And so we found that those kinds of things were very helpful for a peer to be able to explain a little bit better, a senior tutor to be able to talk to someone who is maybe a brand new tutor and talk them through that process. So those are some of the examples I would think about appointment tutoring. In terms of, we had an academic coaching program as well, and we actually had something called learning specialist appointment. So I'm not sure how many folks, your staff who meet individually with students. So that's another great example of, so our LS appointments, our learning specialist appointments, were one-off. A student would book that and it would be a one-time thing. They could, of course, keep booking and they could see us as many times as they would like. But the academic coaching program was a little bit more like SI, or like sort of something where they registered, and so they registered for the whole semester and they got one academic coach that they saw for their whole semester. And so again, you could look at the comparison of those kinds of programs. Are you seeing a difference in, do students prefer to have a quote unquote learning staff member? Is it about seeing a professional person versus someone who is a student, but you're seeing them on a more regular basis? You could certainly look at the differences there. I will say we also did have graduate student tutors as well, and so that's a good example of something where you could look at the differences of your graduate students, who of course might have a little bit higher level of content expertise, and look at the differences for those versus your peers or your folks who are in the undergrad level. So those are just some of the examples I would imagine. We did have we had a public speaking center and a workshops as well. So we did academic workshops. I just think there are probably a lot of really interesting questions. I know one of the things that we looked at with our workshops was, so we had workshops that students could sign up for. They were regularly scheduled and just open and available for you to register and show up. But we also had ones where the faculty member had scheduled it, and the workshop leader would come to your classroom to do the presentation. And so something that I was always curious about was, oh, is there a difference there? Is there, what impacts is it when your faculty member is the one who's saying, let's have a time management session. Let's have somebody come and talk about time management, versus individual students having to kind of go out and find those workshops, and what are the impacts to a faculty member really promoting help seeking versus the student themselves maybe having to reach out for that. So those are the kinds of questions that I can imagine. Those are the ones that keep me up at night, at least. So.
All right, awesome. And then a quick question to follow that one. Sydney wants to know, how did you distribute these surveys?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like I said, we used Qualtrics. So Qualtrics is an online survey tool. So it's something that the University of Texas had purchased that, but I think Google Forms is totally reasonable. It's totally free. You can use that. And I will say that we did not collect student EIDs in our post surveys. So it was a completely anonymous thing. So we didn't associate, we asked them if they had attended SI or not, but we did not take their EIDs or their student ID number. And so I think that's also important to note. If you are concerned about using Google Forms, we're not collecting any of their personal identifiable information, but we did use Qualtrics, and so we sent that out via a mass email to the entire course roster, and that's kind of how we had folks answer the survey.
Okay, and then another question, how did you decide the cutoff for SAT score ranges?
Yeah, so essentially what we did was we took the scores for that and we broke it up into, because based on the SAT, the number of correct answer choices you can get, there's sort of a cutoff there. And so we were able to make 5 buckets based on the cutoffs of, the next answer that you answer correctly, you would get, like, let's say 1120, we would have those as the bucket. So that's kind of how we broke it up. Like I said, again, it was the only metric that we had available to us at the time, but I would really recommend against it in the future, just because it is such a problematic metric. We already know that SATs are not a great metric it's not the best metric, I will say, but that's how we sort of broke it up.
Yeah.
And somebody did ask that, what metric would you use now?
Yeah, I was going to say that's a good lead in to that question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think high school GPA could be beneficial. I think, you know, it depends for us, you know, with the research study that we did, what was really helpful was because the course was a programming course, we kind of asked about previous programming experience. As I mentioned, with something like math support, you could ask like, what was the last time you took your previous math course, and what was the grade that you got for it? So something like that. I think high school GPA wouldn't be the worst. I think the only downside there, at least, is that depending on, you know, the type of high school that they went to, and you know, the level at which they reached at that high school, it could be a little bit different. But it's tough. Yeah, preparation is a really tough thing. It's really hard to assess that, and so that's something that we always struggled with. We weren't always able to get a great sort of metric for their preparation, or predicting, you know, which groups are going to be at risk, or which students are going to struggle in these courses versus which students are going to do great. So high school GPA is not a bad one, though. If you're able to get it, that was something that we really struggled. We were not really able to get folks at the university to give us that type of data. So sometimes we had to get self-report there. Somebody asked, when you say GPA, is it GPA for the course? So we mainly did GPA for the course that had SI. Sometimes we did look at their overall like semester GPA, so what they made overall. But for the most part, we were really just looking at their GPA for that course. Yeah.
And then, yep, and then the next few comments or questions were ones we already addressed. One person had said in response to your question for the audiences, one of the things we have been asked to do is find a correlation between ROI and tutoring. So I'm very interested in anyone who's thought this information. And then, oh, sorry, that wasn't a response to that comment, but.
No, that's okay. I mean, yeah, it's tough. Tutoring is a tough one, right? Because, yeah. And again, not sure the institution that you're at, all of this sort of, because there's so many different factors going on, right? You could be the tutor, depending on how your tutoring is offered, you know, whether your faculty member is promoting it, you know, all of these different factors kind of going in on return and you know, what isn't return on investment? That's the other thing I'm very curious about. We certainly had to, I mean, part of why I did this research is we had to report this back to our higher assessment, and we used this to ask for money. We certainly did it to ask for money to be able to hire more SI leaders, to support more courses. And so part of what this, you know, ROI for the student is definitely one thing, but I think also sometimes, as I'm sure all of you as Learning Center staff have to kind of make the argument for either keeping the amount of money you're currently getting from your university for these support services, or potentially if you need to increase it, how can you make the argument for, you know, you need more resources, you need more student employees, you need more space even. You know, I know for those who are at Sanger, you know, there was definitely when they went back to in person, one of the things that was difficult was making the argument that we needed the study space to be more collaborative. You know, we didn't necessarily want to keep using the rooms that had the sort of chairs that were all, you know, stapled to the floor and that all faced forward. You know, that's not really the SI model. And so how do we make the argument that we either need our own space and we need these collaborative movable tables? And so those are the kinds of things that there's definitely an ROI for the student. And I think that can be made sometimes with just using things like course grade, GPA. And but I think I will say that if you are somebody who's trying to make arguments for monetary support, some of the qualitative stuff that we did can really make a difference, because then you're telling a narrative. You're actually talking to, you know, I'll be honest, of course, the course GPA and the retention rates and all of that is super important, and your higher ups will really want to see that. But quotes from your students, quotes from your faculty, again, doing one-on-one interviews or group interviews with your students where they're able to talk about how different your service is or how it helped them specifically, that can really make a difference when you're, you know, maybe presenting to a budgetary committee or something like that. So, but yeah, I hope other people can respond to Jenny's question about, you know, how other people are kind of making the argument for ROI and tutoring.
Yeah. And then let's see. Okay. And then Sandra asks, how did you get the majority of the students to respond to the survey?
This is it may be for the pre or post survey, I'm not sure. So we did have an incentive. We did I mean, I don't know how many other folks have tried this out. What we did was we said you'd be entered into a raffle for something that we call Bevo Bucks, which is money that they can use on campus for food, for different services on campus. And so we would sort of collect their, we would ask for their EID at the end of the survey, and it would actually be a separate survey so that we couldn't associate them. And then we would just randomly select a student and say, oh, you've been selected and you get the Bevo Bucks. So we did get, I think total though, with the three, I think we offered 3 different opportunities to win, and each Bevo Bucks winning was $30, so it was $90 total. You would be surprised, students love free money or free items and things like that. So sometimes, I think one semester we did not have money to do it, so we just had free t-shirts. Like it was like extra stuff that we had available. We had like squeezy balls, we had like other sort of Sanger swag, and that was our sort of incentive to get people to take the survey. And so it's not that we certainly didn't get all the students to always take the survey. We didn't have, always the huge numbers that we wanted, but that certainly helped. We also, I will mention, we did send it out during the time period when the last class day, between the last class day and the start of exam week, which is about, I would say 3 to 4 days at least at UT Austin. And we found that that was a really great time frame for students because they'd finished classes, so they no longer had like projects or other things due, but they were trying to do anything else than study for final exams. So when they get that survey and they say, oh, incentive to get free Bevo Bucks or to get some swag, they were happy to take this survey. So sometimes that can help a lot. So the timing can help, as well as if you are able to offer them even something really cheesy, something cute. One year I remember we did succulents. We bought a bunch of little succulent plants and people could come pick up their succulents. So you'd be surprised how little it will take to incentivize students to take the survey.
All right, awesome. And then Allison wanted to unmute herself to ask a question. Let me go ahead and
can you hear me?
Hi, yes, we can hear you.
Hi, after typing this long paragraph, I was like, it might just be easier. Thank you so much. I learned a ton today. I really appreciate your presentation. One of the things that I've been struggling with, I oversee a writing center, that you touched on is long-term impacts and trying to look at that. And so I know in your example, there was kind of a subsequent econ class that kind of makes sense to look at. All of our first year students take an entry-level writing course, and part of that is they need to interact with us in some way. But there isn't really another logical class to look at that's like another required writing course that everybody takes. Any other recommendations of how to get that long-term data besides looking at another course? Because really the only students then who are taking additional writing courses are those who are choosing majors. Where that is a central component. So still wanting to see the long-term impacts, but wondering if you had any other advice or any other ideas on how to do that.
Oh, that's a great question. I'm trying to think of a good example of this. Yeah, writing center, so there's no subsequent course, so kind of how do you assess this in other ways? I mean, a very qualitative way, this probably wouldn't be very quantitative, but I think sometimes what we'll do in some of our surveys, I think there was one, maybe the last research project that we did, the one with the cohort, one of the things that we did was one of the survey questions, the last one was, can we contact you in the future if we want to ask you more questions or whatever it was? And so we kind of built in this ability to reach out to students about this study or about their future experience. So one thing you could do, if you're able to collect student IDs, you could track them in other courses, or if you're able to find other courses that they are taking. Again, the students who do maybe choose a major that has a lot of writing in it. But you could also always reach out to those students a year in the future and ask them about how that writing course impacted other courses. I mean, I would imagine that there are other courses that they take that maybe they're not doing, huge research papers, or they're not maybe doing, other types of writing. But I was a biology major, and I still remember having to write a lot during my undergrad program. I had to take a lot of I took a lot of upper level courses where I actually had to write academic writing. So I had to, write research papers. And so the freshman level courses that I took were super helpful for that. And so some of this is trying to understand how is that translatable to other, either other majors that they're taking. I mean, my understanding is that, you want students to have basic writing skills so that when they go into other fields, they're still able to write effectively for those other fields, or even if it's for the assessments that they take in the other courses. So you could do things like, it is a ton of work, I'm not going to lie to you, things like small group interviews or one-on-one interviews, but just meeting with the students and talking to them about, have you seen any translatable impacts from the writing course that you took, or from the assistance you got from the writing center to other courses that you take that maybe don't have a writing component, but have you seen any impacts? It's tough. That's a really tough one. So you might have stumped me a little bit, but I can completely understand it's tough to see. And sometimes students themselves don't see the long-term impacts, themselves. They see it maybe later in their career or things like that. But I definitely, if anybody else has ideas or who oversee writing centers and have ideas here, please feel free to add to the Q&A.
All right. Oh, Nick had a question too.
Yeah.
Oh,
So this is the support guy, but this was just for clarification on one of those, but also to comment on that. I didn't realize how much my like English composition classes and everything impacted me, and doing SI. So it it does help throughout your career. So anyway.
Oh man,
So
Nick, thank you for unmuting and saying that. That like warms my heart so much. And hopefully, Allison, you got that. Like, and what would be very difficult is to track people all the way through. Oh, I will say though, one thing that we did at Sanger, and thank you for reminding me that, Nick, this is super helpful, is we did sometimes do. One thing that we did was we did track our alumni of our student educators, so our student employees. We did, we kept their information, and we did reach out to them, and we did send them surveys sometimes to understand how their work and their experience working at the Sanger Learning Center impacted their future career. That was really impressive, and that was always such a great thing to see, because we had a lot of folks who went into education. We had a lot of folks who even if they didn't, found that their experience working as student employees was really impactful. So I know that would be very difficult to do an alumni survey for just your general pop, but like you might be able to do something like that. So you might even see long-term effects way after college, but that's like if you can get that done, I'll tip my hat to you. That's pretty impressive. So.
I did have a question though. It was regarding one of the, I think it was the engineering students. You said that you were trying to track the long-term effects because they did have a follow-up class and everything. So did they take multiple SI courses, like a second level, or was it just from the one that they had took initially?
It's only for the first one. So we don't offer, at least at UT Austin, we do not offer any, SI for any of the higher level courses. So that was just impact from attending SI sessions in the freshman level course. So that's kind of why we were so astounded by that. So.
Yeah, that's cool. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. I did see a question here that I feel like I missed something here.
Okay, I tried to make sure, but yeah, if we missed anything.
I think someone was asking about the distribution of survey questions was in relation to the pre and post surveys. So we did that using the same technique. We used a Qualtrics. So we used it as part of our pre and post surveys. We just included those questions in our Qualtrics survey, in the normal survey that we would have already sent. We asked them those same questions just through a Qualtrics. So that's we had the roster of students, so sent them an email and kind of asked them to answer those questions through the survey. But yeah, and I apologize if I missed anybody. Thank you so much. I know that we've gone. I know it was scheduled for an hour and a half, but I'm sure folks have had to kind of come and go. But I always love talking about. I love talking about SI, as you can tell. I love talking to learning support people. And so if there are other questions, and I will just mention, I'll put this up here. If you want to take a screenshot, like Rachel said, she will be sending the slide deck out. So all of these papers, the last one is just the International Center for SI, it's their website, but all these papers can be found at the ASE website, and they're free. So you can go there, you can find each of these papers and download them for free. And so if you do want to see, for example, the interview questions we asked, they don't have the pre and post surveys that we did use, which I'm happy to send separately to Rachel, and she can send those out. But if anybody wants to grab these papers, you're welcome to do that.
All right, awesome. And I do want to thank everyone for joining us today. And I do want to remind you that we are going to be redirecting you to a survey, and also just to repeat the housekeeping from the beginning, our upcoming conference near our company's headquarters in Orlando. For those of you who didn't see that link, I'm pasting it here in the chat right now. If you want to join us for some live sessions as well, that's going to be really, it's going to be a really exciting time. We have a great schedule we're building up. And then you can also email me at rachelc@engineerica.com if you want to talk more about how some of our products can help you perform some of these assessments at your own centers. And we can offer you a free trial to explore that further. But I want to thank Nisha for her time today, and thank you all for joining us. And as I said, we are going to be sending out this recording as well as a copy of these slides. So everybody have a great rest of your week, and thanks again. We'll see you at the next webinar.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.